Right, so this afternoon our session is on making sense of the senses in relation to metal. And it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Pravu Mazumdar, who has come all the way from Germany to give us a wonderful talk on the shine on the surface. So if I could ask Pravu please to take the stage.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for attending. Thank you for the invitation to speak. Since the time is short, I'll start off straight away. I would like to Is it loud enough? Is it clear? Okay. I'd like to present a few elementary observations on cultural responses to reflected light in the following. My focus will be on the question, what we do with the shine of surfaces when we become modern. For my illustrations, I will draw examples from contemporary jewelry. The paper is divided into 5 sections and 10 segments. I'll number them so that you can have a sense of at which point of my talk. So that's the structure. As a surface throws back light, a twofold imitation takes place. Yes. Firstly, the reflected beam imitates the beam of incident light. There is no reason to see reflected light only negatively as a reduction of incident light. It is in fact real light with all its visual splendor and appeal, for it is a recreation of incident light without, however, regaining the strength of the original. Secondly, the luminous surface resulting from reflection imitates a source of incident light, which in its most spectacular form is the sun itself. The light of the sun transfers its nobility and power to the reflecting surface, which attains with increasing fidelity a certain solar splendor as it throws back incident sunlight. At the point of maximum fidelity of reflection, the shine of the surface reminds us of the sun, as is the case with the surfaces of noble metals. Their mirror-like surfaces seem to counter and confront the sun with its doppelganger. Number 2, with its imitational energy, the reflecting surface separates light from fire. It imitates the sun as it produces light through reflection, but it retains nothing of the fire of the sun. For centuries, European thought separated light from fire, defining them as 2 distinct principles. In the tradition of the Old Testament, it placed the light of the mind between its flaming source in God and the darkness of matter. In the tradition of Christianity, it distinguished between the light of God and the fire of hell. In its Greek mode, it distinguished between a God of light and a God of fiery intoxication. In a similar vein, a reflecting surface disconnects light from its flaming source to create the optical theological effect of a cool, distant, and transcendent shine. Number 3, the solar nature of the luminous surfaces of noble metals constitutes their value and power, rendering them attractive to the human mind, which begins by desiring the experience of shine and ends by desiring the shining objects themselves. Not only because they are beautiful, but also because they promise power. The very act of possessing them is like possessing the sun itself. In many cultural contexts, gold played a fateful role as a symbol of the sun. As examples, one can consider early European solar cults, like this, Scandinavian, Norwegian, Nordic. It's a Bavarian symbol of the sun, long before the birth of Christ, or in the sacred rites of ancient American civilizations, a couple of Peruvian masks, or the El Dorado cult in an abstract representation. If any power needed to present itself as a symbol of the divine, it needed gold as a reference to the flaming transcendence of the sun. With which I come to my second section, subverting utility. Number 4, most of the things populating our daily lives are sheathed in a skin of utility that reduces and limits the possibility of attributing any other kind of value to them. An important exception in this world of artifacts are artworks, which are meant to be displayed, often in the mode of adornment, rather than used in the everyday sense of the term. Beauty and use tend to be associated with mutually exclusive modes of perception. In general, modern art has an ingrained tendency of resisting utility, expressed not only in Oscar Wilde's famous dictum, all art is quite useless, but also in Duchamp's introduction of the ready-made, when he dissociated an object from its utilitarian function by placing it on a plinth and declaring it as art. Creating a contemporary work of art from a material often makes it necessary to suspend the utility of the material itself, so that the process of artistic production can be seen to consist in 2 steps. The first step is an intellectual act of suspending the utility of a material and substituting its utilitarian value through a new kind of value. The term suspension comes from phenomenological philosophy, so it's a kind of unconscious phenomenological operation of the mind in the process of making, as I observe it from outside. I'm not a maker myself. And the second step consists of in the material act of transforming the de-utilitarized material into an object. Segment 5. A pre-modern example for the suspension of the limit of utility is a hoard, or the Wunderkammer, which involves the acts of detaching objects from their utilitarian context and embedding them in a collection of things which are not meant to be used, but simply to be displayed and admired under specific curatorial rules. Contemporary jewelry has experimented with simulating the archaic hoard, as in the case of the works of Robert Baines and Peter Bauhuis, which are attributed to fictitious sculptures. Sculptures these artists invent, and in order to attribute them to the objects which they create. It's a kind of a technique of sort of surpassing oneself in a certain sense. So the hoard, these are the works of, the first picture I'm showing is Robert Baines, an imagined situation in which the Phoenicians land on the Australian coast and leave behind a hoard of gold objects. It's all bullshit, obviously. And Peter Bauhuis does the same. The gallium hoard. Gallium is a metal which melts at body temperatures, and I was present when the show was initiated, and it was exciting to see how the people were totally confused and discussing and fighting with each other. Is this real? Is this fake? Because Peter Bauhuis said that my interest in his works is rooted in the affinity between them and my own work. So I decided to be a curator of them and presented it. And later on, he created a small series called Replica, where he imitated his own works, but in a wearable form, because these gallium works are not wearable. So he also it's an extremely intelligent technology, or the technique, a creative technology, so to say, to come out of one's own bounds. So, and there's another hoard by Peter Bau, who is called the Kolomna hoard, which he made in this little city of Kolomna in Russia. So the hoard can also be incarnated in individual works by reworking a single ready-made, as in Geiss Backer's stovepipe collier, or in Bernhard Schobinger's toothbrush bangle, or his saw blades necklace, all very well-known and famous pieces in the history of contemporary jewelry. Or as in the case of Lisa Walker's low culture necklace, in which she strings together daily objects of use like boulevard magazines or cell phones. These pieces involve a technique not unlike the late Roman practice of stringing together coins to form necklaces. So, in a similar vein, the use of materials associated with low value can indicate a substitution of the high utilitarian cult value of noble metals with the non-utilitarian value of materials like wood, Dorothea Prühl, or rusting iron, Anna Maria Zanella, or a combination of fur, lead, and silver, Constanze Schreiber, neckpiece, or a combination of silver, bronze, wool, bast fiber, stones in the rings of Iris Bodmer. These pieces employ traditionally impossible combinations of high value and low value materials like silver, gold on the one hand, and wool, wood, fur on the other. The initially low utilitarian value of a material like wool is transformed into a non-utilitarian value characteristic of a jewelry element. The lowest common denominator of such works is the critique of utility, which seems to be baked into the process of making. My third section is called the semiotic skin. I'll present a thesis, a hunch, a theoretical proposal, starting out with a quote from the contemporary jewelry artist Aaron Decker, based in Detroit, who connects the dictates of a traditional material, or the value of a traditional material, with the authority of a father. Decker says, "I'm trying to take the piss out of the material. These material traditions are like my dad. He tells me what I should be doing, and I sit in my teenage self and say, screw that." So I find, I took this quote because I find it a fantastic articulation of the modern temperament. So in the following, I'll try to decode the methodology articulated by Decker in this quote. Number 6. In pre-modern societies, noble metals were not only privileged materials, as in the case of traditional jewelry. They were, in addition, a yardstick for the measurement of value, but also, over and above, divine substances in themselves. Gold was divine, silver was divine. The noble metals were considered to be symbols of godliness. Whenever they were employed in coinage, they were not merely currency, but also valuable materials. As symbols of a beyond pertaining to a god or a king, they participated in the transcendence of both. Such materials thus never existed merely as collections of physical properties and technical functions, but also, in addition, as bearers of culturally prescribed meanings emitted by a kind of semiotic skin on their surfaces. Such skins on material surfaces function in the paradoxical manner typical of all semiotics, for they involve a material signifier perceivable through the senses, as well as an immaterial signified perceivable as an interpretation. As a spread of signifiers, these semiotic skins rely on the physics of the surface so as to be accessible to the senses. On the level of the signified, they are perceivable as non-physical properties like value and power that blanket a material, so to say, and reveal it as whatever it is culturally expected to be. Thus, the semiotic skin is fused with the surface of the material itself, in a sense, constituting something like a rudimentary discourse emanating from the material surface and dictating the perception and selection of the material before it can be used to create an object. It's as if the material would constantly be murmuring to the maker, "Look how special I am. Take me, and create your piece out of me." This is the point where Aaron Decker would say, screw that. The cultural meaning emitted by the material always precedes the object that can emerge from it. My fourth section is an illustration of the point by using the jewelry of Otto Künzli. Otto Künzli is a jewelry artist based in Munich, a great figure in the history of contemporary jewelry. So in these works, which I'm going to show you, Künzli deflects attention from the object to its material source by scraping off the semiotic skin, so to speak, suspending all traditional interpretations of the material and neutralizing these prior to creating an object. Segment 7. One example is Künzli's golden ball for the armpit, made in 1980. The ball, placed in the armpit, remains invisible. The mode of appearance of the object is thus distributed between a haptic presence for the wearer and a visual presence as an X-ray photograph. The very act of wearing the piece covers the surface of its material and covers the piece itself, whereby the covering itself, which is the wearer's body, becomes a new surface of the piece, rendered transparent. The piece is rendered transparent, the X-ray image. So one sees the body as a kind of encasing for the piece. The same effect can be observed in the other famous piece by Künzli in the same year, made in the same year, 1980, titled Gold macht blind. Gold makes you blind. A bangle consisting of a black rubber tube with a little golden ball in it, indicated by a bulge in the tubing. The presence of the golden ball can be felt on the wearer's wrist, but it attains visibility only as a bulge in the blackness of the rubber. The bangle hangs from the wrist as a metaphor of modernity, reminding us of Hölderlin's gods, as the gold with all its divine shine and solar divinity recedes into the cosmic night of a rubber tubing. Segment 8. If gold functioned in many pre-modern cultures as a symbol of the divine, its presence and importance can hardly be felt anymore in contemporary societies. It's no longer accompanied by spectacular displays of wealth and luxury, maybe excluding Donald Trump, revealing its symbolic authority. It's more kept in the background, as contrary to the case in pre-modern spectacles of power. Jean Baudrillard, philosopher Jean Baudrillard, in fact suspected in 1976 a connection between two significant and almost simultaneous events, which took place in the 60s and 70s of the 20th century. The termination of the subject in philosophical discourse, and the termination of the gold standard in the aftermath of the Vietnam War and the oil crisis. The disappearance of the subject seemed to be in tune with the disappearance of the residual symbolical function of gold as a guarantor of fiscal stability. 4 years later, in 1980, Künstli wrote a footnote in gold, as it were, on Baudrillard's interpretation by creating two pieces titled Code and Gold that symbolized modern subjectivity and consisted in two rectangular brooches in the form of industrially produced name cards. The first brooch is a card with a barcode slipped into the plastic sheath typical of name cards, functioning as an identification of the wearer and showing that contemporary subjects function as commodities that can be rapidly identified by scanning their code. The second brooch displays a rectangular gold plate instead of a name card, implying that the name and identity of a subject is a wealth possessed by the individual associated with the subject. Gold in contemporary societies no longer symbolizes the divine. It symbolizes the affluent subjects of contemporary capitalist societies. Both brooches reveal a subjectivity that functions alternately as a commodity and as currency. Segment 9, my second last segment. Künstli's exercises in suspending the limits of traditional interpretations of gold unfold between two extremes. On the one hand is a concealment of gold through the body of the wearer or the opacity of a material like rubber. On the other hand, gold remains visible as a substance, but connotes, as in the case of the two brooches, something radically different from what it is traditionally supposed to mean. A whole series of further works by Künstli displays different degrees and proportions in which the two modes in which gold is either obscured or visible as a new semiotic skin can coexist. A subtle form of such a coexistence is displayed in a small series of rectangular pendants called nare, is a Japanese term, made between 2008 and 2011. The surfaces of the golden rectangle are painted over by a traditional Japanese master in about 24 steps with 3 different types of lacquer. The surface of the gold is first treated by raw lacquer, which is burnt into the surface. Then there are several layers of the black lacquer called Roido Urushi. Finally, there are layers of the red lacquer called Kijiru Urushi, so that the pendants gradually assume the color of the sun on the Japanese national flag. The sun metal is covered by the color of the Japanese sun symbol and can only reappear in its own luminosity when the lacquered surfaces thin out with use and allow the gold to shimmer into visibility as if through a symbolic curtain. With which I come to my last section and my last segment. To sum up, the shine of a metal surface could function in many traditional societies as a starting point for the human urge to cover, enhance, and transcend the body in its naked and unadorned state. This would be articulated in the ritualized use of masks, jewelry, dress, etc. Wherever there was shine, there was the possibility of transferring it to the body in order to become more than what one was. In modern societies, however, the tendency is no longer to become more, but to become different. Transcending oneself no longer means the attainment of a divine ideal. It means instead an act of transforming oneself, ripping open a crust of habits or identities and letting in a flood of possibilities for becoming different. As modern life unfolds, the shine of the surface is no longer a bridge to an otherworldly reality, but instead a trigger for an impulse to switch it off and start our ongoing experiment with ourselves in breaking out of the straitjacket of a personal status quo and unfolding the diversity within us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pravu. And for those of you who want to read a bit more about Pravu's theories, you can read them in his book Gold und Geist. Next up, we've got our wonderful tutor Max. Can you please come to the stage? Talking about his work, Precious Entropy, Experiments in Purposeful Tarnishing. So I think that connects really well with what Pravu just talked about. Over to you.
Hey, thanks, Kathy. Thanks, everybody. Wow, it's wonderful to see so many people here. Thank you for coming. It's great, people showing out for metal. And thanks to Michael and Jonathan for putting this thing together. I know it's been a long journey and like a big undertaking, so thank you very much. So today I'm going to be speaking to you about a current research project, and I'm going to share some initial developments from, it's a very practice-based research project. The approach is very much direct interaction with materials. It's thinking through materials, thinking through metal specifically. And the focus is on the temporal dimension of metal. So I'm going to be talking to you about tarnishing, the physical and chemical processes of tarnishing on metals, but also the socio-cultural perspectives we have on tarnishing. So to give you a little context, I trained as a silversmith, and for around the last sort of 17 years or so, alongside my teaching practice, my work has sought to reinterpret ancient processes and materials in a way that responds to contemporary concerns. Over the last few years, my work has really looked at, alongside some of the reticulation that you've seen on the kind of background slides. I'm not going to talk to you about that today, but I've also been working on bodies of work with mixed materials, looking at creating patchwork sheets of dissimilar metals and creating various forms from these. So the work really is about sort of playing between order, disorder, control, release. A lot of the things actually that Johnny and Johnny were talking about this morning, that was so beautifully articulated. I want to kind of nick some of that from my artist statement, so thank you. So the work has been, like most recently, informed by a kind of post-modernity, some of the cultural theories such as metamodernism, liquid modernity. What I'm have been trying to do really is to get harness some of the feelings of ambiguity and the slippery nature of our digital age through these material manifestations. So these works, they're one-offs, they're non-functional, and so they can end up in with collectors, with collections, with institutions. And increasingly that has started to raise the issue for me of long-term care. So like, how do you fix this surface? How do you kind of preserve it moving forward? And this piece actually was acquired by a collection last year, and this really brought into focus that question of like, how do you look after it? So I sold the piece really excited, it's brilliant whenever that happens. But then they wanted to have information for the conservator, and this is like played on an anxiety that I'd had going back a long time, and I think most metal workers have a little bit of that, like what happens to your work when it leaves you. But I'd never really confronted it properly with this body of work, and actually the realization was that it's really, really very difficult, because with this mixture of metals, and they're treated differently, they're colored through heat or through chemical processes, and you can't look after each metal in the same way. So it became really, really difficult for that to be possible to fix. So the materials I use, like the metals I use, are alive. They react, they change, they never stand still. They're unfixed. And that kind of connects to a core anxiety for metal artists, for collectors, for institutions. How do we care? How do we resist change in the materials? This is especially true in the world of silver. So this is a quote from a paper by Masamitsu Inaba in the Conservation Journal. So he said that silver tarnishing takes place through a variety of mechanisms. In general, this leads to a disfiguring layer on the surface of the silver that is visually unacceptable. So that's pretty strong, it is unacceptable. And that's kind of the prevailing idea, like sensibly, we want to keep our metal clean. But this project seeks to sort of question that, and actually this notion of it being unacceptable, can we sort of reverse that? So to just define what tarnishing is, and it happens through a kind of quite a wide variety of different chemical reactions between silver and compounds in the environment. So sulfides, oxygen, sodium, chlorine, other metals such as iron and copper. Even light has an effect. UV rays can affect the way that silver ages. It's a complex interplay between organic and inorganic particles, materials that we make our world from, the food that we cooked, cosmetics, cleaning products, even our own bodies have an effect on how metal reacts and ages. So even the environment, if, for example, a piece of silver that lived by the coast in Cornwall would tarnish very differently than a piece that lived in Leicester, right, far away from the sea. So it's a very complex arrangement of different environmental factors. But it's not only the environment, but different alloys in silver. So we're aware of sterling most commonly in this country, so that's 92.5% pure silver, there's 17.5% copper. That will tarnish at a different rate to Britannia silver at 58.5%, or fine silver, for example, which is 99.9% pure. So this kind of brought a question out for me. Can we use tarnishing purposefully? Can we embrace the surface degradation of silver at different rates in dissimilar alloys to produce ever-changing emergent characteristics, reversing the anxieties present in silversmiths, collectors, and institutions? Instead of constantly seeking to prevent the inevitable tarnishing and visible aging of silver objects, can we reframe this temporal marking as desirable, resonant, even beautiful? It's an acceptance of change, entropy seen as a creative force. So the notion of entropy, it stems from the second law of thermodynamics, but we could describe it as the principle in the universe of everything tending from order to disorder over time. So the universe began in a very simple way, condensed, very hot in one place. It began with a very small number of elements, so just with hydrogen and helium, and over the passage of time, more and more complexity, more and more disorder. You can see that in your lives. I mean, I definitely can. Giles, you know about my desk at work, right? So we start off with tidy, ordered world, and there's an inevitability over time that disorder creeps and creeps and grows. And we spend our lives trying to combat entropy in many, many ways. We have to exert a huge amount of energy in order to stave off the inevitability of disorder. This piece on the screen I made a few years ago as part of the series, and it was beginning to sort of test this idea. So this is different silver alloys in a single piece, and it was starting to work in a way, but this is oxidized through flame coloring, so it's not true tarnishing, but it was the first step into that direction. But my current research over the last few months, I've been trying to really focus on what is possible within this hypothesis. And this is an initial sample. So this is fine silver, sterling silver, and Britannia silver. And it is chemically altered using boiled eggs, and it's a time-lapse photo. So that took over about an hour or so for that to happen. So in order to explore this idea, I'm just going to go through some of the processes, the methodology that I've developed. The first thing to talk about, I suppose, is the alloy choices. So I decided to use only recycled silver. That's something that I've been working, like a sort of principle that I've been working to over the last few years. And for that reason, it wasn't possible to use some of the products like the anti-tarnish products that are available. So I'm mostly focused on sterling, Britannia, fine silver, and some small amounts of custom alloys that I could create. I was working with several different fabrication techniques, so raising with hammers, hydraulic press forming and deep drawing, and fabrication through construction. So I'm just going to run through a few slides of this process, so I think some of your makers might be interested in this. This was the initial tiles of dissimilar metals, and I've also been working with pulse arc welding with this idea to be able to create more complex forms and build up. So I'm using this welding to tack the pieces together prior to soldering. So it's kind of trying to be the best of both worlds. If you fully weld something, you get this really blurred edge. So the seam sort of merges into each other. But the soldering, you get a crisp line, but it's very hard to do that at scale with different metals because it all shifts around. So trying to combine those processes. And this is the resulting piece from that fabrication process. Similar starting points. So I'm creating these, the individual tiles, which are then soldered together in strips, the strips into a sheet. The sheet I then raised with hammers and then finished into this piece. And this one is a recreation of the earlier bowl, the mixed metal bowl that I showed before, but this is trying to see if I could find a new way for that. So this is like Mark II. This final one, similar initial starting point, so strips, but then it's cut and repieced together. This is like a really recent piece where I'm testing deep drawing, which is a type of hydraulic press forming process where you have two dies that are holding the material in place, so you can really exert a huge amount of pressure. So I'm quite excited to see where this could go forward. Then came the question of how to document and present this. So this is in a closed environment, again with eggs, because they reach this sulfurous environment, which the metal reacts to. But this was really difficult. I spent like countless hours making, remaking, finding new ways to clean the metal and try and make it happen. But in this very controlled setting, the intensity of this chemical reaction sort of almost like, it felt like it was burning it. And time and time again, I was trying to make these films and they were never quite getting where I wanted to. I was getting really, really frustrated. And then it struck me that this entire project is about letting go. It's like stepping back, allowing the material to be what it is, where I was just getting really het up because it wasn't doing exactly what I wanted it to do. So the notion is that kind of going forward, the whole point of this project is unknown, so I'm trying to embrace that a little bit more. But in order to show you a process of oxidization of how potentially these things may shift in the future. I've made a couple of short films of how they react to heat. This is a little sped up. So this piece is fine silver and sterling. So the kind of initial findings, the construction, I've made quite a lot of advances. The welding's been really good at preventing shifting when it's moving. So I'm starting to open doors of new possible forms. One of the things that you can see here that's difficult is the more you solder, the more you heat the material, what happens to silver is the surface becomes enriched. So on the lower alloys, it kind of gets a very fine layer of pure silver on the surface. So you can see the mottled bit and the darker tiles. That happens because there's fine silver on there. So actually, to keep the top surface, to keep the alloys dissimilar is quite challenging. And finally, this is the remake of that original bowl. So this one is sterling, Britannia silver, and fine silver, all pieced together. So the conclusion is I'm still struggling with the communication and documentation of it. I'm still a control freak, but I'm working on it. So I think hopefully I get to see some of you in a few years and we'll see really what actually happens in the environment. And I'll try and release a bit of control. But for now, a really long PowerPoint transition we'll have to do. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Max. That was fascinating. Next on the program, I'm really pleased to welcome Dr. Zoe Laughlin, and she'll be talking about the taste of materials. So, Zoe, I believe you wanted to take the stage.
Lovely and dark, nice. And the lights up. As in house lights on, please. Hello. Okay, so the first part of this will be in the dark. A blessed relief for the front row. I'm not going to show slides because I wanted to show you some things and give you some stuff. Okay, so that's up to the top row. I mean, the balcony, whatever we call that. Now, first, before anything actually arrives with you, so don't actually give them quite yet, because we do need the light. Maybe we don't need the light. Okay, let's do it without the light. So, has anybody ever felt like they would like to have, when you went to a pantomime and they asked some kids if they wanted to come up and they were like, and then you never got picked? And well, this is your chance. Who would like to? It's even darker. It's medium light. I mean, I don't know. Is this really lit? We'll go with it. So anyway, who is like, who has an is that you scratching your head? Don't scratch your head, madam. Up. Someone else who's, again, had a burning desire to come on stage since they were a small child. This is your moment. Otherwise, I'm picking on you. Scratched your eye. You scratched your eye. Up. Now you're holding your nose. You've learned from this woman you don't put your hand in a vertical position. No, okay, they're not playing ball. One more person, please. Yes, come on down. Great. So we've got two people on stage to do something, and you're going to watch them doing something. And we don't need that. Just add to the confusion. But I will place this microphone on the table to give us an acoustic some acoustic input. Right. Hello. And what's your name?
Mina.
And how old are you, Mina?
I am 31.
Mina's 31, everybody. And what did you get what you wanted from Father Christmas this year?
Oh, sure.
Good. You know, you've got to entertain someone, and that's me here. Right, what I'd like you to do, Mina, is with one hand, pick this up, then put it down, then pick that up and put it down. Go for it. This one first. Up, down. And we're all going to watch. Oh, she's gone high. And down. She's milking it. I love it. Mina. Okay, even without the theatrics, we're learning something. You've watched this. What's your name?
Anthony.
Anthony. And how old are you, Anthony?
22.
And are you with your parents today?
Yeah.
Great. Great. Anthony, it's your turn. This one first, please, and then that one. It's gone in with the other hand. Interesting. Dominant hand, maybe. In your own time. In your own time. No! Same hand, please, Anthony. Okay. Nice. Thank you very much. Round of applause from our audience volunteers. Okay, so we learned some things, I think. Maybe we were too distracted by my commentary. But the first thing we learned was that they're different. They're different. We can see they're different visually. So if there was more light in this room, you'd see that better. But for now, we get a sense maybe they are visually different. And then there was a different experience with Mina and Anthony, both behave differently with them. And they're different materials, and so that can easily happen. But the thing is, because they're the same size, you're instantly thinking they're going to be more similar than potentially they are. Anyway, the point of that was, you all now have if I said which one's heavier, A or B? B is heavier. I mean, it's obvious because you've learnt and watched someone do a thing and fail to do a thing and do a thing slightly differently. You've heard the different acoustic signatures that they make when they hit the table, but they're the same mass, or the same volume, sorry, different mass. And that's because they are made from different stuff, but not just different stuff, like different atoms. So this is aluminium and this is tungsten. So these are both pure metals, according to a chemist, that you would find on the periodic table about the ideas of metals. And then once you get them in the world, they can vary slightly. But here we have aluminium atoms versus tungsten atoms. And when you look at the periodic table, that's arranged with atomic mass. And what does that really mean for us? It means the atoms in this are that much heavier that you kind of struggle to pick them up. But it's also telling you about touching stuff. And it's also telling you we're experts in things about this size, things that we hold in our hand, things that we pick up every day. And then this really is not quite like other things you've ever picked up before. This really is, oh, hooray! This really is very, very heavy, and unusually so. And hopefully you're all now ever so slightly disappointed you didn't volunteer to have a go, because the other thing is, doing it is very different from being told about it or watching someone else do it. They're all ways of learning about things. I could tell you exactly how many grams this weighs and how many kilograms this weighs. Again, that's information, but it's not the same as doing it, and it's a different type of knowing of it, and doing it is a type of knowing of it. So please, at the tea break, come and have a go. Okay, but I will give you all some doing to do. I've been asked to talk about the taste of materials, because that's one of the ways I like to investigate them. But also, it's something that's kind of, it straddles many worlds I'm interested in. So I went to art college first, because it was kind of the quickest route to making stuff and the biggest umbrella to get up to things under. But in going down that path, I was making things and asking questions and making work. And I remember a tutor sort of saying, oh, Zoe, it's about the questions, not the answers. And that sort of came up earlier today. I was like, yeah, fuck you. You don't understand. There is actually an answer. and I'm going to find it. Like, it's not about the question. Like, that's the starting point, but it's actually lazy not to try and work it out. Like, they totally misunderstood the nature of what I was trying to make, which was to find something out. Anyway, found myself into an engineering department and did a PhD in material science and engineering because I needed some other languages and I needed some other tools to interrogate things and make other things. And realised that in teaching undergraduate engineers, they didn't know about stuff through the making of it. And they'd be like, oh, I've got this bit of aluminium and I need to like cut it in half. Which laser should I use? And I'm like, well, look, there's like this here, this saw made us, that will cut that. No, it won't, it will, just have a go. Whoa, that's amazing. You know, they hadn't got that experiential use of materials. So I sort of could bring a lot to bear. And through the course of my PhD work, made objects that explored materials as acts of material science experimentation with formal scientific methodologies, research, published papers in science journals, but using techniques of making and art practice as a way of getting stuff done and asking interesting questions, I suppose. And one of the things that came out of it was a project about spoons, which was, what is the tastiest spoon? And I thought, well, science must know what research there is onto metals and what they taste like. And you look at the literature, and there's like 3 studies. And what they do is they put some like copper salts into 100 millilitres of water. They get people to swill it around the mouth, spit it out, and go, yes, bitter 5 or something. And you're like, I understand it, because what that's about, it's about making a quantifiable, repeatable, measurable experience that anyone in the world can repeat and say, look, I can also put 20 milligrams of this type of thing in 100 millilitres of water at 22 degrees centigrade and swill it around my mouth and spit it out after 2 minutes, and this sort of thing. Like, that's all repeatable methods for experimenting things. But I'm thinking, well, it's not just lick a bit of copper. I don't quite... There's a difference between our experience of stuff in the world and the nature of those experiments. And so I started bringing objects into the experiments that helped investigate some of the aspects of the science of the stuff that wasn't being done, because in a way they didn't really have the objects for it. And you could say, get some copper, but it's not so straightforward. You have to be very precise about what it, any impurities in it and this kind of stuff. Anyway, so I'll come on to talking about the spoons thing, but first we're going to have another experience. Right, I've got some chocolate here. Milk and dark. The dark, we're going to start with a box at the back, a box at the front of dark. So, and hang on, let me finish explaining this before, because I know what's going to happen. The minute this comes in front of you, you're going to be like... Okay? You're going to be unable to not eat this. And I understand, and it's not your fault. Chocolate is a very sophisticated material that is designed and engineered to make you go... another bit. Like, that's what it's designed to do, is make you want more of it. Okay, so it's all right, but just try and hold back and go with the room, because it's going to be a different experience to share it. So the dark will come first down the row, and then the milk will come. I want you to take one piece out. You don't need to ferret around and touch everything. There's other people here, we've learned COVID times. Just pick a bit out, put it on your knee or book or something. Don't just clutch it in your sweaty paw. Put it down, and then along will come the box of milk, and you take a bit of that, and then you wait for further instruction. Okay, go with the dark. Go dark. Run to the back. Dark, go dark going. Here we go. Did you just put that straight in your mouth? No. I'm teasing. Someone's going to, though. Well, I will see it. Right, milk. Milk to the back, and I will give this one. Okay, milk's coming down. So you'll have 2 pieces of chocolate of different percentages. Okay, and whilst we wait till everyone's got a bit, I'll talk to you a little bit more about chocolate and its status as an extremely sophisticated act of material science and engineering. So what you have are cocoa fats and solids and sugars, essentially, in a matrix. It's crystalline, so maybe it's a metal. And controlling the size of the crystals, the distribution of the crystals, the ratios of fats to sugars gives you a different experience. And that experience begins with the snap. We're going to ignore the snap, because I've already pre-snapped this for you. I'm sorry. And that might, for some of you, be the bite, but we're not doing biting today, so it gets worse, right? But what I'm going to ask you to do is put this into your mouth and not chew it. Okay, so I'm not telling you to do it yet. Just keep going. Come on, faster, faster. We've got a lot of people to get this round. Keep it going, keep it moving. The people who've already got it, how are you doing? Are you actually salivating yet? Yeah, I know, it's absolutely terrible, isn't it? We're good for time. Okay. Have everybody got a bit? No, yes. How are we doing? No. No, is that a waving because you haven't got it yet? No, okay, it's coming. It's pincer movementing from the back to the front. So I'm sure you've been in a scenario, you know Easter, right? That's like prime chocolate harvesting season, isn't it, when you're young? Never in your life do you get given quite so much chocolate as you do at Easter. There's a lot of talking down there. You're right. Are you having troubles? She's missed out on the dark. Okay, snap yours in half and share it maybe. But yeah, Easter is your prime chocolate harvesting season as a small person. And one of the games that can be played is hoard your chocolate in the spirit of the ye ancient times, so that it can be unearthed and produced to the envy of any siblings. So I remember my sister would be like, I have an egg come June, and be like, God damn it, where did she keep that? But I remember one year she opened up this long hidden egg, and the glee turned to sorrow as she realised it's gone mouldy. But it hadn't gone mouldy at all. It had actually transformed. It had done something called fat blooming. So what had happened is the chocolate had got slightly warm, the ingredients had moved around, and the sugars had redistributed themselves, and the fats had gone to the surface, and you get that, she's put it in her mouth. Yes. Something else, she's eating something else. Okay. Oh, God, the tension. Oh. Just forget the spoons, we're just doing chocolate. It's such like herding sheep. Are we nearly there? Has everyone, no? Okay, more chocolate. So you've got this chocolate, it's fat bloomed, it's redistributed, and it's become a new material, right? That chocolate that now has got that fat bloom on top doesn't melt in your hand so readily, won't taste the same, but it's the same ingredients, they've just been rearranged differently. And a lot of chocolate engineering is rearranging the ingredients and ratios to make it behave differently. So if you ever go to Australia and have dairy milk and go, ugh, what is this? Yeah, it's a different material. It might be called dairy milk, but they make it to a different recipe because it's got to sit on a shelf in Alice Springs and not melt, so they have to make a different material. Okay, I'm going to go for this. If you haven't got it yet, you've got to play catch up. So please place into your mouth the dark onto the tongue. Go, dark onto the tongue. Close the mouth. This is very important. No, mouth breathers, please. Close that mouth and just sit with it. So the first thing is, it's cold. And it's not just because it's winter, but this is a material which, when it first touches your tongue, will feel cold. You'll also notice it's quite hard, like it's got edges. Ideally, I'd give you all chocolate buttons so that the form factor was the same throughout, but hey-ho. We've got edges, which are also interesting for other reasons. But it's cold and you're starting to, I can see, starting to work that jaw, that's fine. Just move the tongue a little bit. Start to sort of encourage it to melt, okay? And smell it internally, feel the smell that's starting to be released. Because as the fats start to melt, it starts to dissolve the sugar, so the sweetness is starting to get going. And once you get the sweet receptors on the tongue, then you're in trouble, because that's when your body's like, gimme, and you've really got to work hard at not chewing this. She's rocking. That woman, she's absolutely rocking with it. Good on you. So you're allowing this material to transform in your mouth and go from a solid to a liquid. And in that transition, you've got the sugar crystals are dissolving, the fat molecules are loosening out, and then are free to make new bonds and tickle your tongue. And it's a carrier for the sweetness. And you're starting to get really heady aromas. You're smelling the roasting of the beans, and again, kind of getting the full, very heady experience of a dark chocolate. This is only like a 70%er. And I couldn't find one that didn't have emulsifiers in. So they're a type of chemical that help the sort of feeling of creaminess even without milk in. But now, okay, chew. Relax, go. Finish it off. Enjoy. Get ready for sample 2. Now, when you're ready, you ready? Some people, it's already gone. Stony face. You happy? Ready for the next sample? Okay, milk chocolate. Onto the tongue. No chewing. Onto the tongue, close the mouth, same as before. Now this time, again, it will begin cold and it will begin hard. But actually, it conducts the heat from your body more readily. So it will actually start to warm up more quickly. And it's designed with a lower melting point. So it has a higher fat content, a higher sugar content. And those things enable it to slump more quickly. So it might be proving more irresistible to us as an experience. Yes, that woman knows it. More irresistible to not really chow down on it. But actually, it could start becoming quite sickly, as the sugars are really getting a lot of caramel notes and you can smell it, and it's really quite rich and intense in a very different way from the kind of high, heady, caffeinated dark chocolate. This is like a slightly sickly swimming pool of an experience. But they're both engineered to be different things and behave different ways in your mouth and melt at body temperature, which is a very rare material property. Anyway, you can finish that off now. That's the end of that. It was only supposed to take like 1 minute. But, you know, so in wanting to make the most delicious spoon in the world and finding that the science wasn't there, I had to then make spoons and conduct experiments into what do metals taste like. And I'm sure some of you kind of would have some experience of knowing that I can sort of smell copper. It's like there's something there when you work with it, and there's a kind of thing that might happen to some of you in your mouth, even though it's not in your mouth when you're working with some metals. Like there are these interrelated physiological experiences. But what was so interesting was that we were able to prove that. So, but also find out new things. So the first round of experiments with human subjects, with ethical approval, proper, scientific studies, were essentially subjects were blindfolded, and they were given spoons in randomized orders and asked to suck them, and then rate their perception of their sweetness, saltiness, bitterness, pleasantness, unpleasantness of it, like to give us a sense of anything. So the first question was, do people have any agreement? Because if there isn't, then there's no point to it. Like, does everybody say, this is disgusting? If it's just random, no one says anything's disgusting, or, you've got to first of all look for agreement amongst your subjects. So the first kind of brilliant thing was that we found really strong agreements. That in blind, randomized trials, large numbers of people, without knowing what they were eating, said gold was delicious. And we're like, oh, that's kind of interesting. They didn't even know there was going to be gold in the room. All they were told it was going to be a range of metals for sanitation purposes. Most people rated silver as highly unpleasant. Interesting, because that's already being used in cutlery circles. And this is just bare spoon. Copper, very bitter. Very, very bitter. And similarly, zinc, bitter. But interestingly, bitter doesn't always mean unpleasant. So there was a group of people who said, oh, it's bitter, I don't like it. And other people who often seem to fall into a category of over a certain age, maybe they drunk to a certain degree regularly, and maybe they did smoke to a certain degree at some point in their life for quite a long time, kind of generation. They quite liked the fact it was bitter, but also that it had some sort of taste at all, because it realised they need quite a lot of flavour to get experience. And actually, you find this research within old people's homes, like as people age, you lose sensitivity and taste, and making a delicious meal for people within a care home environment isn't the same flavour profiles you need in a school dinner. Young children can be very, I don't like that, it's too bitter. And older people are like, oh, it's also bland, I can't taste anything, more salt, more salt. We need different things from our foods to taste them. And so maybe the spoons give that. But anyway, we then we took that perceptual data and we mapped it against measurable, quantifiable stuff. So we looked at what's called the reduction potential of a material. So that was how easily stuff loses or gains electrons. Like how reactive is that surface in a measurable chemistry way? And we found that it was a really good correlation. Like the more reactive the surface, the more people taste it, and the more people go, that's got a strong something or other, and then the something or other slightly varies. So then you get into thinking, well, of course, gold being totally inert and unreactive is the least tasting of all of the metals, but it's not just that it doesn't taste, it's almost like negative taste, because we're really used to stainless steel. Stainless steel is amazing, it barely tastes of anything. But it's not until you've eaten off 24 karat gold that you then think, well, that's a little bit metallic, that normal spoon. This spoon, and some people found that almost disconcertingly unpleasant, because it became into this whole realm of like anti-spoon, like non-metalness. They're very unusual for some people. But then we started pairing them with food. We did a whole series of studies where we made yogurts of plain yogurt and we added lemon juice or sugar, a known concentration. So we were able to make like sweet yogurts. And we made a series of yogurts that were all exactly the same level of sweetness. So kind of back to that standardized method of like 100 ml of yogurt with 2 tablespoons, or actually should be more specific, like, 15 grams of sugar in, right? So you knew how sweet that was. And here's 3 pots of the same yogurt. People are blindfolded and they eat yogurt A, yogurt B, yogurt C. And we go, which is the sweeter? Oh, yogurt B. But in a different for the next person, it's not always B. Like whatever that yogurt was, that spoon was, we might put first, or we might put third, we might put middle. So it's not always about whatever you eat second, right? So just to cut you off on the pass with that one, that's what I mean by random. Like, you randomise the order in which people get it, and you make sure that wherever, for example, the copper spoon, someone might get that in yogurt 1, someone else might get that in yogurt 3, someone else yogurt 2. It didn't matter in what order they ate the spoons. Everybody thought that the yogurt they ate with the copper spoon was a sweeter yogurt. But all of the yogurts were exactly the same level of sweetness. The only thing that was different was they were eating it with a copper spoon. So then you're like, okay, well, the previously determined bitterness of that copper is having an effect on your perception of the stuff that you're eating. And in theory, you could make yogurts with lower sugar content if you eat it with a copper spoon, because then you're thinking it's sweeter, or it's as sweet as it used to be, but you can dial down the sugar. Anyway, this is a little bit of the practicalities of the research, but it led to working with Michelin-starred chefs, redesigning cutlery for airlines, working on the radio, on programs around food. This is just a project that represents for me, if you're interested in stuff and you're interested in making stuff, you want to have as many strings to your bow as with it as possible. And understanding the science of it is just one of the parts of making things. And I've run out of time, I'm sure, so I'll leave it there. But I hope if there's any chocolate left, just eat it now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zoe. Okay, so we've been given the signal to start again. So if I could ask you to please take your seats and give Adi another round of applause. And yeah.
I just said to a colleague, that's why I'm a metalsmith, because I can trust my hammer that it will work. It won't have tech issues. So, and I think it's quite comic that a lecture about sound has issues with sound. So I think we're good now with the help of Kathy here. And we'll start again with this non-familiar sound. Metal in its solid state is considered to have distinctive borders. However, it is a transformative material that continuously changes through states and through time in its form and surfaces. The sound of metal is fluid. It travels beyond perceived barriers in its resonance and its leakiness. The sound of metal is defined as sonorous. It is a deep, vibrant sound. Sonority is derived from elasticity. When metal is hit, the electron cloud shifts, and this movement of electrons causes kinetic energy, which is propagated in the form of sound waves. Different metals produce different sound. For example, gold is a relatively faint sound when hit, and aluminium is high-pitched when struck. Brass, bronze, and other copper alloys produce a deep resonant sound, and therefore historically used for musical and ritual instruments. Bronze bells have been used throughout history since ancient times. Bells have been mentioned in Greek and Roman literature from as early as 5th century BC. They have been used for announcements, as warning sounds, as amulets, and for religious purposes and rituals. They were considered to aver evil or bad luck. In some sects in Buddhism, the ring is said to symbolize the awakening of the Buddha nature in each individual. This is an incredible and extremely weird example of a historic metal sound object. It's the Pisa griffin, a mythical creature from bronze. Its origin is Islamic Moorish from 12th century. It was placed on top of Pisa Cathedral in Italy since the Middle Ages. The original is now in Museo dell'Opera del Duomo. It is monumental, over 1 meter tall and hollow, with an internal vessel. The Pisa griffin was reported to have emitted uncanny sounds, similar to a roar, when the wind blew. The vibrations from the air striking it were amplified by the resonance of the metal, which is similar to Bell's bronze. Islamic art historian Anna Cotendini defined it as acoustic automata, designed to inspire wonder and induce awe. And from wind to breath and contemporary sound art, Susan Phillips' war-damaged musical instruments feature 14 recordings of British and German brass instruments damaged in conflicts over the last 200 years. The sound installation was played through megaphones at Tate Britain in 2016, and here is a snippet of it. Susan talks about the symbolism of breath as a metaphor for life. What I'm interested in is the fragility of the sound, and there is something quite moving about this sound. It relates to the history of the object, which is full of war and damage. It's almost like it's the voice of the object telling its story. My interest in sound stems from my experience working with metal. Metal is an acoustic material, even I can say vocal. It communicates through sounds. Making metal involves a great amount of listening, experiencing sound emanating from the metal through vibrations through the body, and responding to cues provided by the material. The relationship between the metal, the tool, and the hand can be assessed by sound. Sound is invisible and ephemeral, but it becomes almost tactile when working with metal. When holding the metal whilst hammering, you actually feel the vibration of the sound waves. Forming metal usually starts after the metal is heated up and annealed, and it produces a muffled sound, which is surprisingly very satisfying. When the metal hardens gradually, it turns into a resonating sound, and when it's hard, it changes its tone. It becomes restless and jumpy, and its loud ringing sounds almost like a scream. It triggers physical response of empathy, and it's a clear cue that the metal needs annealing. The following video was filmed in a hand-raising workshop I ran in 2016 for 18 students. When a power cut struck us, the students continued to work, completely absorbed and in tune with the metal. It's going to be a bit noisy. Not sure about health and safety, but the sound is great. Clank, clank, cling, ping, bang, rev. These are the onomatopoeias of metalworking. As many of you know, making in metal can be a noisy practice, but is it really noise? The immersive aspect of the sound of metal appealed to me as a young adult struggling with ADHD. It's assertive and invasive, but by neutralizing other sounds, it actually carves its own space and allows hyperfocus and flow. The flow theory proposed by Hungarian psychologists Mihály Csikszentmihalyi refers to a state which you become captured by the activity being performed. In this state, one can become completely absorbed, especially in an activity which involves creative abilities. The reverberating sound of hammering can cancel other physical experiences and induce flow. Arguably, it's not noise, but rather a soundscape of metalworking. The sound of the processes, in fact, are controlled by order, which is almost the opposite of what we expect from noise. Hammering should be performed in a rhythm. For me, it's usually seven strikes, pause. And the rhythm is very important because it controls the form. What do you think about this? Michael said it looks like sand on the beach. Sound has created order. This is my bench covered in silver dust from sanding. I'm hammering and I look down and I see a spine of vertebrae that organize themselves. The silver dust is clamped together and rearranged into pattern due to the vibrations from hammering. And another example of sound vibration, moving metal, by Song Bingyui. She's RCA graduate from 2022, and Song explored the effect of sound on molten tin. Well, I really like the part when it spits out a bit of tin. I don't know if you noticed, breaking the perfect blob. What we actually see is the light reflecting, and the molten tin moves. A sound that I like very much, but some people find challenging is actually one of the last sounds of metalworking process, is the sound of sanding and finishing. These are circles of sandpaper embedded with metal dust, part of my exhibition Echoes of Process in 2018. And when you listen to it, try to imagine the hollowness of the vessel. If you listen really carefully, you can actually hear in the sanding the shape. And let's connect the process with the finished objects. Sound doesn't only function as support or byproduct. It can be worked as a material. Salome Vogelin, writer and researcher of sound, says that the invisible materiality of sound connects inside and outside and illuminates unseen relationship between reality, possibility, materiality, and immateriality. Sound can offer a profound sensory experience, and in my series called Whispering Vessels, I explore relationship between space, form, movement, and sound. These are double-layered vessels filled with loose but trapped gemstones, and they move freely inside when the vessel is moved. The sound emanating from these vessels emphasizes the hollowness of the vessels. The loose gemstones climb up and around the interior wall of the vessel. They draw an interpretation of the internal space and shape through the sound they produce. The quality of the sound and the resonance is determined by the type of metal, the thickness of it, the shape, and also the hardness of the stones and the roundness of them. I try to create harmonious sounds by playing with these parameters. This piece, Whispering in Motion, Whispering Vessel, was acquired last year by Birmingham Museum. It is particularly meaningful as Birmingham has long-standing history as the center of silversmithing industry in the country. Birmingham would have once resounded with sounds of metal. The piece will explore this aspect in the city's industrial and manufacturing history through a sensorial display, playing sounds alongside exhibits. It brings another aspect of contemplation about curation of sound and how sound is experienced in a gallery space. Interesting to think about the challenge with the sound, the leakiness of sound in terms of curation. The following body of work, Talk to Me, from 2017, relates to sound in a very different way. I was exploring the relationship that people form with objects around them and wanted to try and create unexpected dialogue between the viewer and the object. The vessels react to vibrations from human voice and tone and respond with movement. They tremble, quiver as if they are excited, move and rearrange themselves, and sometimes even clank together and produce sound. The object pick cues from the viewer. Can an animate object become sentient? Here is a film with the sound technician just before the final installation.
Boom. Boom. Boom.
These vessels on stilts, as I call them, are inspired by ancient pots exhibited in museum displays on metal tripods. Pouring vessels have the anthropomorphic duality of being able to absorb and give, which I find interesting. I wanted to challenge the hushed environment of the gallery or museum by asking the audience to speak to the objects. My purpose was to break the rules of behavior, what usually we expect of ourselves in these kind of spaces. The following film was recorded in the Saatchi Gallery at Collect 2017, and just to see how people interact with the installation.
The other day, upon the stair, I met a man who wasn't there. He wasn't there again today. Oh, how I'd wish he'd go away.
Hello, you vessels. Talk back to me.
You're not alive, you can't move. How are you moving? Just stop moving.
I don't know if you heard the clank when he said, talk back to me. They actually did speak back to him. I may not be objective, but my favorite is my daughter saying, why are you moving? You're not alive. I think that's so great. So people reacted in really strange ways. They were sometimes embarrassed and self-conscious, but sometimes they started singing as well and connecting, I would say, having this sort of emotional transference to the object. I think that was just super interesting to see it in that environment and what people allow themselves. And actually, some of the audience today participated in this longer film that you can watch on my website. Oliver Beer, Albion Waves 2023, reveals the hidden sounds of 2,000 years of British vessels. The installation features 28 vessels and the resonance as a response to London Mediterranean collection of Roman objects found on site.
When you walk up to the vessel, there's a motion sensor that just turns on the microphone, and you can hear the inside of the vessel amplified for the first time. So I'm actually not creating any sound at all, I'm just revealing the sound that's already inside the vessel. If you just imagine how when you listen to a seashell, it's completely inanimate and yet you can still hear sound coming from it. And a vessel is exactly the same, it has this geometry. And so all the ambient sound around it, when it comes inside, gets filtered through the notes that fit inside that vessel.
It's really interesting body of work, and actually an extension of, I think it's called Vessel Orchestra. And one of the things I find really interesting is that each vessel has a different voice, but also the way it's activated by sensors. So it would speak only when it's approached. I think that's fascinating. Some of the objects are metal, and I don't think it's still on. No, I think it's end of the year, so just missed. But again, full videos on his website. I want to share some of my current research. I became very interested in mirrors in the last couple of years. As an echo of changing time and reality, a mirror reflects both fullness and emptiness at the same time, holding not just what is there, but what has been or what potentially will be later on. And in that sense, it's also a container. I was exploring metal alloys used historically for mirrors and discovered white bronze or specular metal. It has been used in different cultures for mirror making. And in this photo, I'm alloying and casting speculum, which is 2/3 copper and 1/3 tin. This composition makes the metal luminous. It can be polished easily and highly reflective, but it also does this. Who would have thought that metal can be as brittle as glass? So we're talking a lot today about the transformative nature of metal. It exposes fragility, but there is also incredible energy in the sound. Actually, when it shatters, it sounds like church bells. And lastly, I just want to encourage you to go and see my exhibition at the moment at Sarah Marskov Gallery called Earth to Earth. It deals with resonance of soil and earth and exploring notions of time and the profundities in nature, mark making and patination. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adi. What a fascinating talk. So we're totally out of our schedule, so I think we're just going to press ahead and do the question and answer session now. So could I ask the speakers of the second stage of our symposium to come to the stage, and we maybe rearrange the chairs a little bit. And if you've got a question you might have thought of over the coffee break, don't be shy. Now is your time to ask it.
Okay, great. So I think I'm going to get us started with another thought I had during your presentation, and that is maybe the temporal aspect of the materials you're talking about, and temporal aspect. And I thought all of you had a certain element of temporality in your talk, so maybe, I don't know who would like to start to maybe comment on that.
The question was, speak about time and temporality in relation to your work.
I can speak about it, but not so much in relation to the talk about sound, but in experiments in patination. The series of works that, the current series of works that are now on show in Mayfair Gallery, they actually explore the effect of different soils and places on metal. So I buried pieces for different lengths of time and finished them up in the workshop and then chose different places to bury them. So what I got from it is, first of all, experiencing myself what is time, because of the time I had to wait, but then to see the effect on the metal. And patina, as I think as Max mentioned, has this quality. It's a living surface, so it keeps changing over time. And I think there is something really poetic about it and interesting. I mean, we change over time, so why do we expect different things around us? Maybe because of that, because we change, we expect some stability. So maybe Max, you want to?
Yeah, well, I suppose that was the core of what I was talking about in my project, about the kind of embracing this notion of change, not trying to push that tide back. But I guess on a material science level, nothing happens to like things happening are a marker of time. So I'd be quite interested in your perspective on that, probably.
I think a lot of material science, as separate from engineering, is essentially about a sort of snapshot and an idea of a thing. So in the sense of, what's this like right here, right now, under these conditions, I can tell you. But that's not the same as what it's like in 3 years' time. And so it's easy to forget about time within lots of the paradigms of materials, because they just say, they talk about materials in the archetype of like, oh, the idea of copper will behave like this and you'll find it like this and this is copper. But then the reality is, well, is it copper that's been in that drawer, or copper that you've cleaned, or copper that, like, it becomes a different negotiation, and you have to remember it changes over time. And then within something like material science for engineering, again, a lot of the game is trying to guess what might it be like in 10 years' time, and will that mean you might die? Do you know what I mean? Like, if that bridge does change over time because of a slow fracturing or a slow, like those slow behaviours that are easy to forget about when you're just doing snapshots, those slow behaviours are the things that will cause problems, I suppose. But you can design problems and find them interesting. So I don't mean to be like pejorative around things, but you know what I mean? If you are, which I'm not, but of that kind of like literal mindset of like, I am building a bridge and I really don't want people to die, then you do really want to understand how that material will change over time. They would describe it as the material will fail, but you know, that's just a transformation from being in one way to another way. But knowing that, like, this may be consolation or nice to know, but like EasyJet, they don't own those engines in those planes. They lease them from Rolls-Royce, because Rolls-Royce provide a service contract that tells them, we put our name to the alloys in that object of those turbine blades, and we know when they'll fail, and we will monitor that, and we will tell you, do not use that engine anymore. So, because they're interested in that, whereas EasyJet are interested in different things. So you allow the space for the people who are paying attention to what's changing over time to get on with it.
But do you think metal changes more than other materials?
No, but it's all relative to the environment. So everything changes. That's the bottom line. And we can either get involved in it or not. So we can, for example, I don't really use terms like raw materials, because again, that's all relative. Like, one person's raw material is another person's end product. That's a supply chain question. It's not about, oh, I'm talking about coal versus trainers. Do you see what I mean? Like, the raw materialness isn't, it's just what stage of processing, like mining and extraction are making processes, and they end up in lumps of stuff that another process starts making with, but they're also making in the same way as geology is making to make the coal in the first place. So it's always in process and it's always changing, but some things get certain words and commodification and money gets involved, and that becomes easier to understand to some people as a product. But then, like, there's a whole industry based on getting different grain sizes of copper. So imagine, you know how you get like caster sugar, granulated sugar? Imagine if you had like 60 different grain sizes for sugar, and that when you're baking a cake, it says you need 15 nanometer sugar granules to get this to dissolve at the right speed. Like, when you're making high performance metal alloys, you will be specifying like however many grams of a type of copper that you put into the mix with a grain size of this, so that you know it will melt in at this given speed to this level of, it's that complicated. And then you think, well, how are they making these little balls of copper? Like, oh my God. So there's a whole industry of like spraying copper into different atmospheres to make the tiny little bits, different sizes of tiny little bits. Like, that's an amazing thing of making, to then get something that's another person's raw ingredient for making their sophisticated alloy. Anyway, I'm rabbiting
No,
on
it's
about
fascinating
mad
because
stuff.
I felt it in casting that it actually matters the type of copper that I use, whether it's recycled or it's what the size of the grains are. It does matter in the alloying, so it's fascinating.
I found it really interesting what you're saying about the perspective of metal failing in engineering or in design, and that makes me think about what you were talking about, Pravu, with those principles of defining an artistic process, and I suppose that it's all about perspective, right, and context. And I'll be interested that difference between functionality and, I guess, a sort of creative or poetic expression is how we frame change, how we frame the passing of time and its effects on the material world.
Okay, I think I have to change the plane of reflection a bit to give, I can only give an indirect response to your question. First of all, maybe it's important to state that traditionally the Europeans and the moderns are extremely sight-fixated, which means that there's a play of power between the different senses, and the sense of visibility, the sense of the sight, has been traditionally extremely powerful. So that was the point of my talk, to apply the phenomenological technique of bracketing in, which means that if we neutralize the sight dimension, sound makes its appearance. All these things which are hidden by the stark light of the sun, so to say, they come out of their hiding in a certain sense. It's interesting to see, or to reflect on the fact that we have eyelids, but we don't have ear lids, we don't have taste lids, and we don't have touch lids, which means that the aspect of visibility is associated with the subjective aspect of controllability. We can control, so we can decide not to see. But when we are hearing something, when we are tasting something, when we are touching something, we are, in a sense, delivered. We have to deal with it. It's there, we can't shut it off. So the entire posture changes. We become, in a sense, as sound humans, taste humans, we're different than we are when we are touch humans. And I see that, as always, art has much more to say on these things than science or philosophy. And therefore, I have been studying the way artists deal with these issues, and have realized simply when artists are working in the visual medium and they're taking the visibility of something like the noble metals, which visibility applied to metal is what I call shine. And that this work with the visual dimension of metals seems to, at least in the limited area of contemporary jewelry, which I have sort of dealt with, articulates itself in the mode of bracketing in the shine, the mode of neutralizing the shine and seeing what other kinds of visibility make their appearance. Like with Otto Quintly, he compels you to see darkness. Can one see darkness? What's the difference between seeing nothing or not seeing? It's very difficult to distinguish the two. Am I seeing something when I'm seeing nothing? Am I seeing darkness, or is it that I'm simply not seeing? Am I blind, or is the world dark, so to say? That's the level on which he works.
Can I ask something? So you talk about the shine, but what about reflection?
Yeah.
So in reflection, we see ourselves in the object, or we see the room in the object?
Yes. But the whole point is, that's what I meant, that I'm giving an indirect response to your question on temporality. In the philosophy of Kant says that sight, space, they are connected, space and sight are closely connected, and they're on a different plane than the other senses which you have, which are connected with temporality, and that is connected with subjectivity, which means that there's a world on the one hand, and there are we on the other hand. We are temporal beings. Everything in us is in flux. But the world, in the Platonic sense of the word, is static, which means that when we deal with the essence of things, the crystalline essence of things, which are articulated in the Platonic forms, it's imagined, philosophy has always thought that these forms are eternal. So when you fix your gaze on something, and by the way, fixing one's gaze is an act of exercising power also. When we do that with human beings, they petrify, so to say, under our fix. So that's what philosophy has tried for a long time, to petrify the world, to sort of throw such a gaze at the world that is in our control, because it's immobile, so to say. But when we bracket that in, then we suddenly discover a new world, and also us, our subjectivity as changeable, as transformable, as workable, as malleable. And to speak with the Stoic philosopher Epictetus, who wanted to be for himself what wood is for a carpenter, which means that to what extent what extent am I my material, which I can fashion and craft into a form, which is what can be perceived by my environment from me. So this working with oneself, so to say, that is only possible when you stop. It's actually basically a critique of Plato. Stop fixing everything and start dealing with your own transformability. I hope that was some kind of an answer.
That was fascinating. I'm going to open this up to the room now, because I'm aware that some people... Oh, I see a hand going up there. Pranathi?
Hello, Max. You spoke of working with a conservator on a piece. Now, I fully appreciate that conservators can't arrest a process. The best they can do is slow it down. But what was the recommendations the conservator gave, or are they, I can't say happy, to let your piece continue to change over the next, say, 50 years and record it at different stages?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what I'm calling for. That's what the piece exists for, in a sense, for it to develop over time. I'm trying to see a kind of paradigm shift in the kind of psyche of silversmithing and of collecting, because I don't know, I think there's quite a lot of silversmiths in the room, and probably we've all felt that in different ways of Thanks, Johnny. Yeah, different ways, that level of anxiety. And I think the piece for the conservator now is it's an experimental process where I'm asking for them to not clean it. I mean, it's up to them. They can do what they want when they buy it. But the proposal that they are accepting and kind of being really supportive of at the moment is to see what happens over time, to see what the effects of this kind of entropy is on the piece.
Max, I have just something to comment. I think it's really interesting in terms of like a piece that lives in an environment of a collection or museum, and over time that it accommodates it somehow, this change. But also I think when we live with an object, or the same as when we live with people, we don't notice the change when it happens. So obviously in the fast forward that you showed us, it was really clear, but again, sense of time and changes. So you you can't really point, oh, now it turned grey or blue.
At what point would you regard the tarnishing process of having gone too far, where there was no longer any differentiations in the surface?
Well, I mean, that's not up to me. I think that it's a sort of complete like spectrum of possibilities with the work. So if you wanted to buy the work, you can, and it's a good rate. But that if you wanted to clean it every day, that's up to you, and it would remain white. But if you wanted to clean it on its 10-year anniversary every decade, and you could reset and restart. But the idea is to remove the absolute necessity for it to always remain the same, to kind of celebrate the marking of time, to celebrate the natural processes that happen within the universe, really. It sounds quite grand, but on the matter that is present in that work is part of the kind of the systems in the natural world.
So you're happy to accept an intervention at some point?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's very, very new, so no one's had it for 5 years, so I don't know. But yeah, it will eventually be completely tarnished, and in the way that when it's freshly ground back and it's completely white, there are subtle markings. So it could be that it becomes almost completely black, but there would still be subtle markings and like a subtle pattern within it. So it's just I'm trying to let go. So I'm not going to impose what happens to it, but I'm excited to see what possibilities can emerge.
So
but if they ask you to clean it?
We're going to have time for one more question now, I think, and then
Hello.
we're going to have to wrap things up. I see you've already got the mic
I can tell you this anyway, what I wanted to tell you, Max. Is for example, when you think of samurai, warrior armory, yes? So the metal techniques, it's a question of the alloy. So that's what I meant with what the knowledge of how to do these kind of metal fusion, so to speak, have been brought to the West. So, for example, Tiffany and some of the archival is still in the archive in New York. So in a way, I also know of Tsinghua, for example. They are teaching these old Japanese metal techniques. And again, it's a question of the alloy. The alloy can then do whatever it wants, so to speak, but the pattern is not getting lost. So in a way, I think it's going back to what hundreds of years old techniques that are not practiced anymore. To bring that back, if that is your research question.
Yeah, it's all a reframing. All of the processes I use often date back sort of millennia even. And I think as artists, we're reinterpreting, using very often the same tools that go back for very long times, but reinterpreting to respond to what's happening now. So hopefully that's what the pieces are doing. Responding to this kind of slippery age that we live in now, culturally and psychologically, I think.
Thank you, Max. That's wonderful. Just a final question from upstairs.
I think the initial question you asked about temporal is so important. What we've seen is a snapshot where, as I used the term earlier, kinetics and the aesthetics of kinetics is a valuable attribute of all designs. And we've seen it in metals here. And the polysensorial nature of kinetics is so crucial, as you pointed out. Sight is so dominant. And if we look at the degree shows and we look at the art galleries, so much is still static. And the real challenge for design across all disciplines, not beyond applied arts, is the philosophy, the theory and practice of kinetics. And that's so undervalued. And I hope the RCA, of all places, can take up what you're saying in a very strong way and push that because there's so much missing out, and you're doing excellent work in pushing those frontiers. So it's not so much a question, it's a statement that excellent day, and I just hope the RCA does more of what you're trying to do across all departments.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we're very much behind time, but I think some people might want to run to the toilet or something while we set up our next set of speakers who will be speaking about metal as a global concern. So.